In this lecture, we'll be learning how to use RStudio. RStudio is an integrated development environment, an IDE, for working with the R scripting language. It's open source, and you can find more information at rstudio.com. You can find more information at rstudio.com, where you will typically install RStudio on your own machine. And here's a link to the RStudio course material that we'll be following. You will also find this link from our H3A Bionet R page. It's this Intro to RStudio. And this material is from the datacarpentry.org organization. It's going to take us through knowing your way around RStudio. So the first thing we're going to do is open an instance of RStudio. And here we can see there are two main ways of interacting with R in RStudio. First is the console that you see at the bottom here. And the second is the R scripting window, where you see this currently untitled script. Besides the scripting window and the console, we have two more windows, and you can drag these bars around to resize these windows. At the top here, we have the environment, where you'll have a summary of all your objects once you start coding in R, as well as your command history, which is currently empty. This little pane in the right bottom corner will show any plots that you create in R, and it'll also show you any help. So if you have a specific package or function that you don't know how to use, you can search here in the help bar, and that will bring that up. So let's get ourselves set up in RStudio. So when you start and you make an R script file, you're going to want your script to have a working directory. And to do that, we're going to start a specific new project in R. So if you go to RStudio, and you say File, New Project, you can either use an existing directory or create a new directory for your R project, and that will be where R knows to look for all your data and your R script file. So I'm going to create an empty project. I'm going to name it Intro to R. You can name it whatever you would like. And I'm just going to save it in a directory and that will be my working directory for this project. You can say create project. And now you can see we have this intro to R.R project file in the viewer here to the right. The advantage of working with an R project where you start off by setting your working directory is that you can use relative paths to import your data and refer to your script files. So you would only refer to the script file name without having to specify the absolute path. And of course, that's also useful for collaboration where someone else would have a different absolute path to you, but in that case, the script would still work for them. They just set their own working directory. If you're unsure of what your current working directory is, you can use the get wd command, and that'll tell you the absolute path to your current working directory. You can also use the set wd command to change that working directory, where you would then specify your new absolute path here. Or you could, under this little more button here, say set working directory to change that. Now we're going to get started with our own R script file. So if you go to this web page, you can download the code handout just to make it a little bit easier. So you click on that link, that should download the file, and then please place that in your working directory that you just created with your new R project, and name it something that makes sense to you. We can click on that code handout.r script file, and that will open up all the commands we're going to be working through the course of these lectures. But before we do that, I'd like to show you some more skills in RStudio that'll make your life a lot easier. There are several shortcuts in RStudio. I have summarized the most useful ones for you in this PowerPoint presentation. So firstly, to comment or uncomment certain lines of code, which means, so here we see the hash before this creating object in R. That means R won't read that as code. That is just something that you've written so that you can remember what you've done. And the shortcut key, so I say intro to R, and if I do Command-Shift-C on Mac or Control-Shift-C on Windows, that'll comment that line for me. You can repeat that to uncomment that line of code again. Another useful thing you can do in RStudio is to create code sections, and the shortcut key for that is Control-Shift-R or Command-Shift-R. So I'm going to do Command-Shift-R, and I'm going to do a section label. Maybe I want to import my data. And you'll see it'll start off with the hash, which means it's a commented line. And all this is really is a heading for your section of code. And you'll see here on the left, there's like a little collapsible arrow. So if you have a really long script file with a lot of lines of code, this becomes useful so that you can collapse certain sections and move through your code block easier. So at the moment we are navigating in the script window. So you'll see our script file always ends with a .R, which makes it an R script file. But sometimes it is also useful to use the console. And if you want to navigate between the script window and the console window at the bottom here, you can use Control-2. Now we see our little toggle is at the bottom here. Or Control-1 to get back to your scripting window. Let's start off by typing some code here at the bottom, and you can do simple arithmetic. Maybe we'll do 3 plus 5. You'll see that gives you the answer 8, so that'll print it out in the console. It's also possible to do the same in the R script file, 3 plus 5, and the way you would run that is not just to press enter, but to press Command Enter, and then that'll run the line that your cursor is on. Or you could, for instance, highlight several lines of code, and then either press this Run button over here, or Command Enter, which is the shortcut. And that'll print out both those answers for you. I also like to show you how to get help in R. So say you want to use a certain function, you want to make a bar plot, but you don't know how. You don't even know what the function is for a bar plot. Then you would click on this Help tab over here and say bar, and then we'll bring up all the bar plot related functions. So there's a bar plot function in the graphics package, and here it'll tell you about the usage, the arguments you should specify, so that's height would be one argument, width would be another. Or you could also access the help file from the console by starting with the question mark. So if I go question mark bar plot, and here you'll also see the tab completion function that you have in RStudio. So when I just start typing, it already brings up bar plot options for me. So the one I'm looking for is bar plot. And then I can just do tab, so I don't have to type the whole thing. And then that will bring up the help file for me. So let's get back to the R project that we created and look at the working directory structure. So it's really good to have a set working directory that you use for your projects. Typically you might have a folder called raw or data where you would store your raw data, and you don't want to ever edit that data. You make sure it's exactly what you got from whoever supplied you with the data, and then in a different folder you might want to specify your data output or your results. you might have a separate folder for your figures and another one for your scripts. So you can either create that as you normally would create folders on your computer, or in RStudio where your files for your project are summarized, you can make a new folder. So maybe I want one for my results. I'll create that folder. Maybe I want another one for my raw data. And so it's really good to structure your environment like this in a way that you would do for each and every project. The thing that I'd like to discuss in terms of using RStudio is how to save objects from RStudio. So these are really important functions, and it's very useful if you have an R object that might be a whole data frame with all your data that you'd want to share with someone. You can save it as a .rds object from R with the save RDS function. So that would actually be a file that you can send to someone, and then they can import it with the read RDS function. So if we look at that in RStudio, and R has some built-in example data. The one data set is called iris. So if you just type iris and you do Command Enter, you'll see in the console that is what that dataset looks like. And maybe you want to save this dataset file. Then you do Save RDS, and you see here the tab completion brings it up, so you can say tab. And then here it tells me what arguments I can specify. So firstly, the object. In this case, it's called iris. And then I would want to specify the file name. So I'm going to call it iris.rds. And now you can see that iris.rds has popped up here in my working directory. And that is because we created a project, so R knows where your working directory is. Similarly, you can use read RDS. And in this case, we'd want to say file iris.rds. And then that will actually read that dataset back into R for you. The last thing I'd like to mention in RStudio, which is also very useful for reproducibility, is the session info function. You type session info in the console with no arguments. It'll bring up a list of all the packages that are currently loaded in your working environment. And importantly, it also gives you the versions of the packages used. Sometimes functions will change slightly between package versions, so that is important information for your collaborators to have as well. Finally, I've included some additional links that might be useful to you for RStudio. There's a link from the RStudio website itself, which is writing code in RStudio, and then there's another one for debugging code in RStudio, and I encourage you to go through those, as well as the data carpentry material we've worked through, just to read through all of this carefully and make sure that you're comfortable in using RStudio.